Thank you so much, Victoria. I'm very, very happy to be here and glad to have this opportunity to introduce this session along with a couple of speakers that we have. So, in the next 1 hour approximately, we'll be discussing and debating what is the impact of the Russia-Ukraine situation on the veg oil prices around the world, which affects most of us who, one way or another, consume some of the other vegetable oils. My name is Kamal Seth. As Victoria mentioned, I'm the global farmer lead for WWF based in Singapore. And let me just get started by giving you a bit of a context on the session today before I open it up to the panel. So I'll be sharing my screen and I hope you'll be able to see it. So here we are. One of the most pertinent questions in the recent weeks have been about price inflation and about affordability of essential commodities around the world. And some of the communities are hardest hit, whether in Asia or anywhere else, where the prices have gone up, and specifically for the vegetable oil. And we are also concerned about the sustainability efforts that have been going on for the last couple of decades for essential commodities like palm oil, and what is the impact on sustainability efforts because of the situation. So we have two speakers along with me who will be giving us or helping us unclutter this complex data-driven analysis that some of us have been doing, and to make it simple enough for the larger community of people to understand the impact of the war on the vegetable oil market. So just to begin, for those of you who are not very familiar with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, it's present in more than 100 countries, science-based organizations for more than 50 years, with a strong base of more than 5 million members, 13,000 projects since 1961, and a strong community on social media as well, with more than 30 million people. We work across many causes and issues that our world faces now, starting from wildlife to forests, freshwater, oceans, climate and energy, and food. And we have several practices that drive the solutions for those causes, namely finance, markets, and governance. So WWF teams are spread across the world, and Singapore happens to be one of the international hubs which hosts the global palm oil team. So what we'll be doing is going through a bit of a background to just take a step back and understand what happened before the war began and how was the vegetable oil market, and what is the impact of climate change already being seen from places like Latin America or Southeast Asia on the productivity of the crops and the farms, and how did the war kind of exaggerate some of those challenges on the markets. Then we'll go on the impact on palm oil itself, being one of the largest traded oil crops commodities in the world. We'll also see a very important crisis, which is faced by the industry right now, which is the fertilizer crisis. And from smallholders to large growers are struggling to meet the same level of productivity as before because the prices have gone up. So the cost of production is much higher than before, which means as an average consumer out there, people are paying much more for a day-to-day item than they were paying before. And then we'll kickstart the panel discussion and then ask you to uh, ask any questions for the panel. So just to put some facts out there, one of the concerns has been that the human consumption and the population has put an immense pressure, as you see, on the natural ecosystem. So agriculture, 70% of freshwater withdrawal, 40% of ice-free land use, 70% terrestrial biodiversity loss, and is caused by agriculture one way or another. And I won't read all the stats here, maybe you have seen it before, but what really worries us is a system which is bound to fail because the loss and waste right now is about 40% of the food that goes uneaten, while 26% of the people are obese and overweight, and then we have 11% of all people who go hungry. So it's a cycle that we have seen over the previous decades. As much as the world has grown and developed, some of the economies have progressed. On the other hand, we have seen nature, which has suffered in a system that needs a transformation. Uh, so if business as usual continues, as far as biodiversity loss is concerned, what we have seen from the 1970s and don't do much about it, we will continue to see that, and there will be some irreversible damages and extinction of species if we don't influence the food systems that we have right now, which is, we feel, broken. If we do some improved conservation efforts and start applying nature-based solutions, we have a better chance. But what we really need to do is conservation and food transformation at the same time. It's a bit too late to do it one by one and to experiment, ideas over decades. We need to act in this decade of action, which is by 2030, and that needs conservation efforts which are more in tune with the local realities and food system transformation. So how do we do that? We're seeing biodiversity along with food and climate because climate change is here, was here before the war, will be here. And it's an urgent call to action to connect the food systems with climate change by stressing upon nature-based solutions, making commodities like palm nature positive, definitely halting deforestation, definitely stopping the extinction of species caused by agriculture and beyond. So a food system approach would mean this. It would mean nature positive production, sustainably managing food producing lands and waters with no new habitat conversion. It would mean food loss and waste, so eliminating food loss and waste from farm to fork. And it will also mean sustainable consumption. So you and I who consume agricultural products with or without palm oil or sunflower oil or any other veg oil in it, we need to move our consumptions to more sustainable diets. So aligning human and environmental health so that everyone has healthy and nutritious diets within the planetary boundaries. And for some of you who might have also seen, there is a wonderful documentary on the planetary boundaries being on live for a while now on online channels. As far as palm is concerned, so palm is part of the food system, of course, because it provides food security to millions of people. And on the other hand, it provides livelihood to millions of smallholders and oil palm farmers in Southeast Asia, in Africa, as well as in Latin America. So the production of palm and the demand has gone up drastically in the recent decades. But what we are seeing here is the trend, which is likely to continue in most countries in Asia, which are going to demand more and more palm oil, putting more pressure on the natural ecosystems and the rainforests around the world. So right now, it's about 75 to 80 million metric tons, which is the world's demand for palm oil, and it's likely to go up to 264 million and even beyond that if the current human population demand and human population increases as it is right now, and the world demands more and more of vegetable oils. So palm oil is most produced, consumed, and traded veg oil. From a global production point of view, Indonesia and Malaysia produce about 85% of all palm oil, whereas from a global consumption point of view, 61% of all palm oil is consumed in Asia. Also the most popular, so 40% of global veg oil production is what palm oil's contribution is. 60% of global veg oil trade and 40% of global veg oil consumption. So it's a commodity which is inescapable. It's hidden. It's not hidden. Either it's used for deep frying purposes or it's as an ingredient in a toothpaste, soap, or shampoo that we use on a day-to-day basis. So just to set the context of the panel, we had already seen some of these trends on the daily vegetable oil prices. What the war has done, it has escalated it to a point making it unaffordable for a lot of people to buy the same commodities or the products. So the two global supply chains which are being disrupted right now because of the situation are sunflower oil and palm oil, putting more pressure on palm oil and soybean oil to meet the unmet demand for sunflower oil. So the global cooking oil prices have been on a surge since the pandemic began for multiple reasons. There was already a drought in Latin America, which hampered the production scale of the soybean crop. And that was without the war itself. So the pressure on soybean and palm has only increased because of the lack of trade and supply of sunflower coming from Russia and Ukraine. So impact of the war on agriculture, specifically on palm oil. So according to FAO, in 2021, either the Russian Federation or Ukraine or both ranked among the top three global exporters of wheat, maize, rapeseed, sunflower seeds, and sunflower oil. So as a result, this war has sent shock waves through the global markets when food markets are already struggling with soaring prices and the challenges that the world has been facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you combine climate change to the COVID-19 pandemic and the war, and it's market shocks after market shocks, and everyday consumers have got the hit in the in front of their face when you pay the food bills, you know that you're paying definitely more than before. So there is high demand for palm oil, and this could potentially trigger the production of more non-certified or unsustainable palm oil and drive up deforestation rates. So we are still a bit early to predict, but that is one of the potential risks for sure. It's not to say that it will definitely happen. And therefore, our attempt is to make sure that if any expansion in productions take place, is done in a sustainable manner, so that it's not at the cost of the environment, biodiversity, or social indicators. In terms of the food prices and the social unrest, just to give you a trend since 2005, the food price index has kept going up the moment there have been social conflicts or political conflicts anywhere around the world. And the worst hit amongst these from these trends are the farmers, are the smallholders, are the people, the day-to-day people who would struggle to pay 10 or 20% higher than the usual food bills, or even get access to essential commodities which are not in the abundant supply that they used to be. In terms of the fertilizer crisis, since some of the agricultural crops are obviously dependent to meet the demand, you need to use those fertilizers, and increased natural gas prices and impact of sanctions has increased the fertilizer price by about 300%. Brazil imports 50% of potash from Russia and Belarus. Fear of fertilizer shortage globally, which is worsening the situation. And the shift to organic fertilizers takes time to train the farmers, the growers, to shift from chemical-based or other fertilizers to natural organic fertilizers. So it's a challenge that we need to face right now because of the lack of supply of the fertilizers, but it's also an opportunity for us to encourage growers around the world to move to organic fertilizers and natural fertilizers. Uh, I won't go into too much details here, but I think it's quite self-explanatory, and you might have seen some headlines in the media as well that the world fertilizer prices have skyrocketed after China curbed the imports as well. So it's a problem for the entire agricultural communities around the world, and it's something that the world is experiencing. But as I said, it's an opportunity to move towards more natural and organic fertilizers for agriculture as well. How realistic that is and how it is not, I think it's a matter of time, and it takes time to help the entire system transition to something which is more sustainable. For food security concerns have also been there because of the trade restrictions. So the Western sanctions on Russia, a major exporter of potash, ammonia, and urea, have disrupted the shipments of natural resources, resulting in reduction of fertilizer availability, thereby raising the food security concerns. It's a very difficult decision, obviously, but the consequence of that is on the global availability of food products around the world, which is causing the concern for food security. And the sky high fertilizer prices have farmers worldwide revised their farming plans. Who are the ones who are most at risk? Those living in poverty and in countries dependent on food imports are most at risk of suffering from food inflation crisis. According to the World Food Program, 811 million people are chronically hungry, 276 million are living on the verge of starvation, and nearly 49 million live in 43 countries on the verge of famine. So it's a recipe for a disaster, and we are looking at a potential conflict that might happen because of these lack of availability of basic food items, or if they become unaffordable. So just to wrap it up, potential sustainability impacts. So the changes in the supply chain networks, the fertilizer crisis is obviously making things more difficult for the farmers' livelihood and the cost of production, but there are also concerns uh, on how the businesses will transition to sustainable agriculture practices and how that can be accelerated. Energy prices hike and the demand for renewable energy. Again, we know it takes time to shift to renewable energy, but the situation we are in right now means that we need to accelerate all the transformational work that we have been doing over the last 5 to 10 years or even longer than that. So coming back to the integrated agenda, we think that biodiversity, food, and climate need to be tackled at the same time, and they should contribute positively to the solutions for one another. And that will be one of the first questions that I will be asking the panel. So if I'll if I could ask my speakers here, HS Yen and Yu Lenkor, to switch on their videos. If you have not, I think I'll just see you here. Yeah, I see both HS and Yuleng here. So I'll just quickly introduce them to you one by one. Yuling is Oxford University LSE trained business economist, specialist in data visualization, analysis, and deep dive for market intelligence. Also an associate at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs and advisor to the Jane Goodall's Root and Shoots initiative in Malaysia. Also lead in economist in 2018 for the palm oil study for the EU Commission. And then we have HS, someone I know for several years now from back at my days at the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, is the lead for impacts monitoring, evaluation, and learning unit at the RSPO, trained economist and data scientist, and provides high-level strategic insights for market transformation efforts and for RSPO to meet the vision of making sustainable palm oil the norm. So let me start my question with you, Yuling, first. To just give the context, there are two supply chains which are being disrupted right now, the sunflower supply chain and the palm oil supply chain. The magnitude of impact highly depends upon the duration of the conflict and the nature of the final outcome. However, in your view, why do the global palm oil prices matter to people like you and me? And what are the risks related to the length of this crisis? Are we looking at a short term, medium term, or a long term risk here?
Yeah, thanks, Kamal, for the questions. Maybe I'll just give the overall context on prices that's been happening over the last few months. What we had coming into this was actually, well, at least we've had 2 years of rising prices in the commodity complex. And the ones which are relevant for vegetable oils are obviously palm oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, and then also an important influence as well is energy prices, because at least a quarter of, say, palm oil and also for other vegetable oils are also used for energy purposes, transport fuel, and also some in power generation. So we've had 2 years of rising prices, and then there's been a soaring of prices in recent months. And what we face, actually, we look very closely at sunflower and soy prices, because that's where palm oil trades with, usually at a bit of a discount, because palm oil is a tree, so it's continually producing. You know, farmers don't make decisions every year on it. And you know, you look at the UN FAO's vegetable oil price index, it was already at a record high in February, and this peak has just continued to rise. It was really a perfect storm of issues that had contributed to this surge. COVID-19 pandemic had basically brought various difficulties in logistics, and there were pretty much ongoing government mandates on using palm oil and other vegetable oils in alternative fuel blends. And this meant more demand and more persisting demand. And this is where, you know, renewable energy and climate change policies have been focusing on vegetable oils use. And of course, that, you know, is part of the whole food versus fuel debate, but it's pretty much there, and it's persisting. And then we face the supply shortfalls aggravated by droughts in Latin America and labor shortages and floods in places like Malaysia as well, a key palm oil producer. So we had these further price spikes, and which was really set off by the shock of what happened with Ukraine, which we have been greatly saddened by. And there was a subsequent rollout of sanctions on Moscow and its allies, rising petroleum prices, as we've mentioned. These have impacted shipping costs and boosted the viability of really using palm oil as an alternative fuel as a replacement across the whole vegetable oil complex, in fact. And let's look closely at the US Department of Agricultural data. So focusing on Russia and Ukraine, these two countries together account for about 2%, 8% and 57% of global soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower seed production, respectively. So just repeat, 2, 8, and 57% of soy, rapeseed, and sunflower. And in fact, if we look on the trade basis, it's even higher. So the significant presence in global export for these two economies, for soybean oil is 7%, for rapeseed oil is 20%, and sunflower oil is 77%. So that's really the key influences here. A lot of the increased supply in the vegetable oils has actually been from canola and the Black Sea region. in the last couple of years. And in fact, palm oil, which had been such a rising supplier into vegetable oils, has actually been easing back because places like Malaysia, they just can't increase production. There's not much areas to expand into. And of course, there is a sustainability considerations, but they haven't been able to manage in terms of expanding a yield. And Indonesia as well has greatly pulled back on expansion in palm oil. In fact, its deforestation indicators are kind of well down, I think, compared to other regions in the tropical belt. And their supplies have also not been greatly increasing. So the Black Sea region has been actually a notable incremental supplier, especially of sunflower oil. So the halt and of the shipping from the Black Sea ports and the sanctions in the payment systems were really huge things going on. If the war is protracted, there is obviously issues about supply. And of course, in addition to this, we had at the same time issues out of Indonesia about restrictions of exports. Now they are trying to surge exports from Indonesia, and therefore we've seen significant price corrections in the last couple of weeks. And
thank you, Yiling. We'll come back to you with the next question. I want to get HS into the conversation as well to help the audience here kind of unpack this, what you just mentioned. I think, HS, the question is, how does it impact my food bill, me as a consumer or as an employee of an organization that might be trading in it? So can you unpack it for the audience to say, how does it matter to me?
Thanks, Kamal. Thanks, Yiling, as well, for setting the stage for this. I would say this, Kamal, it impacts more than just your food bill, it impacts your entire household bill. And the reason for that is that palm oil is not just an oil. It actually becomes 1,000 different derivatives and fractions that appear in your household bill, not just in food, instant noodles, which are very popular here in Asia, but biscuits, French fries, your shampoo, your toothpaste, even your wet wipe can contain palm oil. And that's because it is such a versatile product. And it is one of the most productive oils as well. It accounts for 40% of the world's global demand for vegetable oils, but it only uses 6% of the land in total that's devoted to vegetable oils. So for that reason, that's why palm oil is so entrenched in the global market, and any impact on its prices means that there will be a corresponding inflationary aspect to your household bill, not just your food bill, your household bill. At the RSPO, we support the sustainable production and consumption of palm oil. Obviously, that's been disrupted. We have seen very high prices. So prices basically have doubled from what they used to be earlier this year. That, as Kamal mentioned, that was because of the, at that point, it was the weather issues in Latin America, but also because of labor issues in Malaysia and Indonesia, the two largest producers, which in Malaysia at least is very highly dependent on foreign labor. And because of the disruptions in the travel due to COVID restrictions, that supply has been constrained. We saw another spike again when the Ukraine crisis happened. We're starting to see some of that correct itself because there's been a lifting of the travel restrictions. We've started to see prices recorrect themselves, but they're still at levels that are 20 to 30% higher than the previous historical peak. And that's because of the wider context of inflation, energy inflation, transport inflation. That lifted tide isn't going to go down anytime soon, even though palm oil prices have gone down slightly from their recent peak. But that means that your household bill is being impacted. Everyone knows that. You will see headlines about how inflation in America is now at 8.6% last month, highest it has been in 50 years. And that's a concern. And it's even more of a concern in the developing world, here in Asia, where people are being impacted. Some of the poorest people in the world are being directly impacted by that. We saw India and Indonesia recalibrate their policies on palm oil imports and exports because of a domestic cooking oil crisis. And that's the kind of issues that we're dealing with, because palm oil is entrenched, and any increase or sustained increase in palm oil prices will directly affect household bills. And I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, and perhaps Yiling, this is a question for you, what happens? How long will this crisis persist? And what are the risks associated with a short, medium, or long-term period to this supply chain disruption that we're seeing? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, hi, Yen. Thanks very much. A good roundup on that. Thank you. I think this is, I guess, really the world was so surprised and shocked. And what's been happening since the conflict has been ongoing is that supply chains have been making adjustments, especially if I was looking at as you point out, one of the key things is fertilizers, and that impacts everyone globally producing, agri-food products. Is that I think the markets are somewhat adjusting to this. So, in fact, it's interesting. I was listening in on some of the fertilizer experts recently, and then also checking up on some of the viewpoints, and they are expecting actually the downturn in prices of fertilizers to sort of stabilize. I mean, we've seen some sort of price adjustments, and I think they've been expecting like a 20-30% falls, I think even more from where we are now. And I think this is where we have the global economy, global supply chains really sort of adjusting for sourcing from different regions. There is I know there's a lot of sanctions going on, but at the same time, a lot of the world is just adjusting, frankly, to buy, fertilizer from Russia and also energy products from Russia. So this is the Asian context and a lot of other regions as well. So I think this is helping on the price corrections and the easing of views. And in fact, I think some of the specialists, the analysts who are looking at it, sort of seem to have reached a level of, they sort of understand the restrictions and the problems. I mean, we are also seeing a bit more sanctions happening on, say, Belarus fertilizer company, but it's a situation where it's already in force majeure, so they weren't really able to supply that much. So I don't think that the sort of supply and demand people are really expecting so much further changes. I think once they have made adjustments, and I think we've had a couple of months of that already, I think it's reached a level where you can see it in the prices, not just of fertilizer, of the commodities, they are easing off, and also even in the outlook for freight is also diminishing. So I think I really hope that this the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, can really ease off with a resolution. But the world has, at least the supply chains, have made these adjustments, and they seem to be reasonably comfortable with forecasting further diminishing or stabilization of prices. So it's this thing where the world is shocked, literally and economically, and supply chains, and then they have been scrambling to adjust. And I guess this adjustment is just getting people have gotten more used to it. So I really don't know how to forecast on this. I really hope that for humanity, it's going to stop a lot sooner. But economically, I think I wouldn't say it's a comfort zone because everything is very elevated. But I think in terms of the critical scrambling, obviously that has stabilized to an extent.
Thanks, Yuling and HS. I will push us along to the next question, which will also help us get your responses on other aspects of this. So many organizations are taking steps to address some of the challenges posed by the war. For instance, in order to ensure availability of the day-to-day products for consumers worldwide, many companies are currently looking at viable alternatives to address the shortages. I'll start with you, HS, now. And in the interest of time, I would ask you to restrict your response to a couple of minutes each. How is your organization impacted by the current geopolitics, and what has been the response from your organization during the crisis in 2 minutes?
Okay, thanks, Kamal. Please time me. Okay, so as I mentioned, RSPO supports the production and consumption of sustainable palm oil. And against this backdrop, what we've seen is that there has been an increased interest in the use of sustainable palm oil, given the disruptions in alternative palm oils. And we are using that that pivot to reiterate that there is an urgent need to address the sustainability within the palm oil sector, given the immediate needs of consumers, but also for the future of the industry and the future of the planet. So we are a membership-based organization. We also set the global standard for palm oil, and we do not intend to deviate from that standard. We encourage our members to continue to source RSPO certified palm oil, either physically through the identity preserved, segregated, and mass balanced physical supply chains, but also using the RSPO credits under the book and claim model, where it is possible if physical volumes are not available. And these come in two flavors, one of which is RSPO credits, and the other which directly compensates independent smallholders that are certified by the RSPO. For non-members of the RSPO, we encourage you to pivot to palm oil if sustainable palm oil is available. Please identify where palm oil is present or in your supply chain and needs replacement. Draft a sustainable palm oil policy, look at sustainable options in terms of sourcing. Please reach out to us at the RSPO. We're ready here to support you and explain what options you have, but also communicate that change to your stakeholders transparently, because transparency is another big tenet of the RSPO, and we do support that this change, even if it is temporary, should be done transparently and to all stakeholders for organizations. I hope that was 2 minutes.
Thanks, Sajid. Almost 2 minutes. Yuling, quick response on this?
Yeah, I mean, I work as an economist, so I talk to various companies, agencies, as well as media. Maybe just to reflect on the topics which I think have been of interest is obviously inflation. People have been very concerned about that. We're seeing, headlines of 8% across Europe, North America, and where I've been looking at a lot is this issue of the politics of inflation. And I think this is where the world has not been used to seeing this for many decades now. I mean, I just have big memories of it from when I was younger. But I think talking to corporates and agencies for them to understand why the political and the policymakers are really making surprise moves in terms of policy. So that's been quite a bit of the focus. And I think this is where with the Ukraine crisis, with other disruptions going on due to, climate change, I guess, with, fires and floods and droughts and everything. I think this is really changing the political economy of how policy is being made. And I think the corporate sector is really caught by surprise on this as well, because we have the situation of, in the agri-food sector, it's a highly populous sector where you have, a lot of farmers as well as a lot of consumers. And I think the corporates have been in a sort of comfortable situation for several decades now in terms of policy and stakeholder influences. And now, things are really quite drastically changed because of this upending of how food prices are going for these various reasons.
Thanks, Yuling. I think one thing that really stood out for me was you talked about the politics of inflation, and for many decades, there have been a relative comfort level as far as agri-food is concerned, which involves millions of smallholders and consumers around the world. So definitely there is a political consequence of any disruption there. I'll move to the next one that will help us unpack this complex topics even further. So there is high demand for palm oil, and it raises concerns around its production if the expansion takes place in a non-certified or unsustainable manner. So in a landscape of spiking prices and changing climate, can these crises support efforts to mainstream sustainable palm oil and sustainable commodities in general? And what policies and actions will be needed from the government and companies to balance concerns of environment, production, and livelihood? HS, again, I will start with you, given RSPO as the leading standard in sustainable palm oil production. Do you see this as an opportunity that when the world demands more palm oil, the growers of palm oil, including smallholders, can then have the capacity and the opportunity to do it in a sustainable manner without any environmental or social concerns?
That is what the RSPO is here for. That is why the RSPO was created, and that is what the RSPO is aiming to achieve as its mission. And I point out an interesting fact. You talked about disruptions affecting the production and consumption of sustainable palm oil, or palm oil in general, actually. Actually, over the COVID-19 crisis, so 2020 and 2021, even though palm oil consumption and production declined overall, the demand and production of certified palm oil under the RSPO standard actually increased. And that was, to be honest, slightly a surprise to us because we have been preparing for a decline, as most people have been preparing for a decline at the start of COVID-19. But it also told us that actually sustainability in palm oil is a lot more entrenched in the global market than we might have even previously thought. It's stronger than what we might have thought. And we see this not just in mature consumption regions such as Europe, but emerging markets such as China and India. We see the drive for sustainable production accelerating, not just in Malaysia and Indonesia, but also in West Africa, also in Latin America, also in the rest of the world, places like Papua New Guinea, the rest of Southeast Asia that are starting on their palm oil production journey as well. It's a lot more entrenched than we perhaps might have thought. And that's a good thing. But that also presents a problem because that was one disruption, not ipso facto, that further disruptions such as the European crisis might not have the same effect of it. But it does tell us that the the drive for sustainable production and consumption of palm oil is growing. And we now need to meet that growth in a way that continues to uphold our commitment to our three pillars of people, planet, and prosperity. But we can only do that with the support of our members and the support of our the people that support our manufacturers that have made the choice to pivot to sustainable palm oil, to move to 100% uptake and use of sustainable palm oil. That is what the RSPO as an organization can do. Obviously, there are ways that we can work with the governments and our member companies, RSPO and non-RSPO, to drive that forward. But as a takeaway from the last 2 years, I would say this: sustainability, at least in the palm oil context, is a lot more entrenched than we might have thought, and that's a good thing.
Thanks, HS. Yuling, what kind of concerns or opportunities do you see because of this?
Well, I think the certified space has been a really fascinating area, and it's been so important, about 20%. And obviously the concern would be the 80% that is non-certified, but there is a big section which has this sort of traceability, responsibility thing on it. Obviously, what I've been seeing analyzing the certified and sustainable markets is that there's been a bit of a shift, not say a shift, I mean, the certified is very stable. And then there's this other element which then works towards this, but on a non-certified way. So I think what's positive is an increase in supply for certified, and I really hope that there will be more producers who will do so. I think the market has a lack of clarity of information that there's actually a shortfall on certified materials. In fact, just as the base price of commodities have gone up, what I've noticed is that the premiums for certified products are very, very high as well. So if we look at the economics of this, actually, the people who got in earlier into, say, RSPO certification, I really believe that they've recouped all their costs, all their investments from day one, whether they've been participating from 2004 or 06 or 08. There's been, this is the commodity cycle that happens, right? You have to invest. You have to be able to survive through with your debt or your investment through a gestation period. And then commodities prices have this tendency to spike up and then spike down. So you need to survive the spike down and the bottoming of the prices. But when the spike up happens, not just of the base commodity, but also sustainability premium, you basically, you can pay down all your debt in 1 or 2 years. You can pay off all your investments in 1 or 2 years. And I hope that these high prices and the high premiums actually encourage more people to then upgrade, invest more in their sustainability operations, whether it's environmental, social, and I think for conservation, I mean, this is something that has to come as well. We need more clarity of how people actually spend on people, planet, and profit. A lot of it we understand from the profit, but I think although there's been a lot of talk and commitments on people and planet, the metrics is not very clear on this, and I believe that this will be emerging. And obviously another thing is also the carbon footprint. I mean, all these things are correlated. Good indicators of one will be good indicators on others. So I hope that high prices encourage the right investment rather than I don't want to do sustainability. And in fact, from a palm oil perspective, I think the stability of the area seems to be fairly clear in that sense. So for if I just step a little bit higher quickly on vegetable oils, where the increased output is going to come from, that's really the big question. And it could actually be soybeans, and it could be Latin America. So people should look into that as well.
Right. So I think what we're saying is if it goes in that direction of Latin America and soy meeting that demand, then it should be done in a sustainable manner. Of course, just like you mentioned, certified palm share is 20% in the global market. There is still 80%, which is not certified by the RSPO. And then similarly for soy, if any expansion takes place, it should be done in a sustainable manner, not at the cost of environment or biodiversity. I want to leave some time for the audience to ask some questions. So I'll come to my second last question for your quick responses. Palm oil is the most affordable for daily cooking purposes. Lots of people use it for deep frying. I know in South Asia, in India, where I come from, it's the most popular oil. From the street food to the street vendors and anything else that you want to eat. It is a source of livelihood in the most producing countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and elsewhere, and price hikes have put an essential foodstuff, cooking oil, out of the reach of many of the world's poor. So the question for you both is, how can world leaders and countries mitigate the socioeconomic, political, and environmental risks arising from the higher cooking oil prices? And to put it in context, the slide which I showed earlier on the social and the political unrest from the Arab Spring to now the Ukraine crisis have meant that the food price index have gone up at the same time, making life difficult for smallholders and average consumers. So, Yuling, I'll start with your view first, but would request you to keep your response to sharp and brief in a minute, and then come to HS.
In terms of prices, if we look at the consumer viewpoint, I think a lot of countries have been able and willing to give subsidies. And then, of course, they are finding problems when they're trying to subsidize things like cooking oil, because you're not sure whether it's actually going to be diverted elsewhere. So we saw problems in that in Indonesia, that you didn't quite get the volume and the price. They couldn't understand why the price was not better because they're a big producer. If you look at the places in South Asia, I think, Kamal, maybe you could interject as well, but I hope that they are offering some subsidized volumes to the usually the B40 should be heavily targeted for that. So if it's not sort of cash handouts, that there is a more focused subsidy regime going on. I think there doesn't seem to be much choice to do so. Otherwise, a lot of the food products are easily going to go up 10% in price. And I think that's really my quick response on that. Farmers, I think, don't worry, they're enjoying very good prices. So the politicians and the farmers are going to be reasonably happy on that front. It's really the consumers at this point.
So the worst hit are the consumers. So thinking from the RSPO members' constituencies, we know that thousands of members of RSPO come from consumer goods manufacturers and retailers. What's the connection and how do the RSPO members look at the situation?
Well, to be honest, Kamal, we are a voluntary membership organization, and that sets the global standard for sustainable palm oil. So there are actually limitations to how the RSPO can directly influence, or directly affect market issues or market fluctuations such as this. You know, prices go up, prices will also go down. What we will say is that we encourage all our members to stay committed to the long-term goals of sustainability, whether you're a producer or whether you're a manufacturer, and do that so responsibly to consider not just your own organization or its vision, but also its impact on the general population. As Yuling alluded to, we are always working together with some of our smallholder farmers that are very, very important in RSPO. We have quite a lot of smallholder farmers in Southeast Asia that are currently under RSPO certification. Increasingly, we're seeing our first smallholders coming from West Africa, from Sierra Leone, from Mexico as well, and they've been benefiting from RSPO certification. And they're also some of the world's most vulnerable communities that are also being affected by rising cooking oil prices, rising household bills as well. So RSPO certification does directly benefit these smallholder groups. But as an organization, there are limits to what we can do as a voluntary standard and as a membership organization, but we encourage all our members to stay true to the long-term goals.
Thanks. It's just, I'll come to the last one, which is more of your call to action to the people watching this webinar today and maybe later on its recording. Is there anything that we can do as individuals? You mentioned some suggestions for world leaders, corporate leaders, governments. You think of the people watching this, people working as sustainability professionals, or in any part of the world. What can I do as an individual? Is there something that I can do because I feel the impact? Obviously, we would like the crisis to finish, but what can I do now? And I'll start with Yuling on this one.
Well, I think as consumers, if we just look at our day-to-day, I think we should be, I know it's probably not the most economically driving thing, but I think we need to be careful about how we consume. I mean, I think it's very hard as an economist to say that you're going to get sustainability with high consumption. And then especially at the time of this conflict and these supply chain disruptions, we just have to be prepared to be more patient in our consumption. And I think if I just then jump to the very high level, I know a lot of people here are involved in policy and in stakeholder engagements. I think we need to be very honest about how we're looking at solutions. We mentioned quickly about the politics of inflation. I think part of this is the politicians and policymakers getting a lot of suggestions, which I think in the past, we could have had decades of self-serving policy suggestions. I think we're sort of really running out of space for it. We don't have it. And this is what I'm asking the young policymakers to do as well. Really look at the issues, grab it by the throat, be honest, think a bit longer term. Obviously, I know we have short-term issues, but we need honest solutions. I think we've had many decades where it doesn't matter in terms of economic policy making, but we just don't have much space now to be very self-serving. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. HS, what is your message to the people watching this?
Well, I would say that it is your choice, and choice and the right to choose is a fundamental human right, and that's one of the main tenets of the RSPO as well. If you choose to support RSPO sustainable products, then you're making a conscious decision to actually support the RSPO's ambition of making sustainable palm oil the norm. And by doing so, you help halt deforestation, reduce carbon emissions, protect wildlife and biodiversity, protect human and neighbor rights. And that is a choice that we can make as consumers. It's a choice that I have made since I've joined the RSPO to support RSPO or certified products and manufacturers that use that. It is a choice that is not necessarily available to half of the world's population who are vulnerable from rising cooking oil prices. They don't have a choice, but we have a choice. And if we exercise that choice, we lift the tide for sustainability and we drive the industry in the right direction so that the people that don't have that choice can come along with that rising tide. It's the same choice that I think that everyone listening in on this webinar has as well. This is a fundraising webathon, and we have friends, brothers and sisters in Ukraine that are being severely affected by this crisis. And so you've chosen to join this webathon. Thank you very much for listening to us. And we hope that you can exercise that choice to support Ukrainian charities as well. But thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you so much, HS and Yuling. And I think we are right on time. And WWF believes in togetherness. We think together is possible. And the right to have that choice is what matters. And what we have been asking people around the world is to choose sustainably, improve our diets, move towards sustainable consumption, and ask governments and companies to provide sustainable products wherever possible. And if we don't change that behavior within ourselves, then our governments and brands will not be able to do much, because at the end of the day, we are the consumers and the voters around the world who have that power to shift and that power to choose. We also feel that we need to build more capacity to produce more with less. To help the transition to sustainable agriculture practices will mean that from the same piece of land, you're able to produce more. That takes time. It's a marathon, but we feel it's possible if we work on it together. So with that, I would wrap up and pass it back to the organizers. This was amazing to be here and support the efforts for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and this crisis, which has been there for a while now. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for listening to us. Passing it back to you, Victoria.